What's going on YouTube? It's TH back again with another video, and today I am talking to you about the Cleveland Browns and our Fix the Franchise series. Another team down on our way, getting closer and closer to both free agency and the NFL draft. So let me hear your thoughts about how you think the Cleveland Browns should approach this offseason, whether you're a Browns fan or just an NFL junkie like myself. What moves are you making in free agency? How are you clearing up some cap space? What do you think they should do in the draft? And then ultimately, what do you think this team looks like next year? Do you think Deshaun Watson improves upon what he did this past season with the Browns? Do you think Kevin Stefanski starts to get on a hot seat if the season goes sideways? Love to hear your thoughts and early predictions for the Browns and their next season, plus what they would do this offseason. So obviously coming off a 7-10 season, and it's a weird one at that because, you know, you have Jacoby Brissett, then that's transitioned into the beginning of the Deshaun Watson era, so lots of weirdness. Also, I do want to note, change of defensive coordinator, and I think really interesting one. Jim Schwartz, a guy who's had a lot of success. I mean, was good as the Eagles DC. I mean, even had some years where he was okay with the Lions. So I'm interested to see how this ultimately plays out. Unfortunately, it just didn't ultimately come together for Joe Woods because I wish it did. But I think that change in defensive coordinator, I think, could go a long way to shoring up that defense. Because when you look at the names on that side of the ball, you're like, dude, Cleveland should not be. And there were weeks where Cleveland's defense was really good, and it's like, okay, there it is. There it is. They're kind of matching that talent. And then there were weeks where it's like, dude, why do the Browns struggle so much on that side of the ball? It doesn't make any sense. So I do think a change in DC will go a long way. But okay, now let's talk about the draft picks. 8, no first rounder, of course. That belongs to the Houston Texans for the Deshaun Watson trade. And then obviously 2 4s and 2 5s. So I like the 2 4s. The 2 5s, I'd be interested to see if they bundle that up and try to maybe even move into the 4th for a third time. Because that kind of like the Ravens last year where they had this like 5 or 6 4th round picks. After the 4th round, it's where you get into a mean drop off on day 3. So I'd be interested to see how they played those 2 5s. Then when it comes to cap space, negative 14.34. That's 24th in the NFL. I do think they have some contracts that are pretty that you can work pretty easily, but nothing that's like too heavy when it comes to a cap hit. So I think Deshaun Watson and the restructure of his contract, I talk about him all the time, but GoNow actually has a free tool you can use. Just literally go to his Twitter and you can find it, or go to his YouTube channel and you can find it. The restructuring of Deshaun Watson's contract is one of the things he has in there for the Browns, and it would say like $30 million against the cap. So I totally anticipate that happening, plus some of the other works and some of the other contracts they can cut off the roster. So I do think this team will get up and over that. Obviously, they're going to have to get up and out of the negative, but I think they're going to have some room to spend in free agency. That said, I think they're going to have to go cheap pretty much across the board because it's still not going to be a whole lot of money to use. So I think it's worth entertaining the idea of re-signing Anthony Walker. I know he missed a lot of time last year, but 2 seasons ago, I thought he was pretty serviceable, and he was among maybe the best middle linebackers the Browns have had in the last half decade to decade. It's been a while since they've had a player who was really going above and beyond at that spot. So I'd be intrigued by Anthony Walker coming back. I don't think it'd be expensive considering he missed so much time last year. And then Ronnie Harrison. I think a change of defensive coordinator. Like, I loved the 3 safeties they had. I loved Grant Delpit coming to LSU. Unfortunately, it hasn't really come together. John Johnson III, for whatever reason, was only on the upswing. Like, he was just getting better year over year with the Rams. Goes to Cleveland and then kind of hits a mean wall. So I wonder if that is Joe Woods. And then the third in that was Ronnie Harrison. And I always really I thought he was a good player in Jacksonville. I thought the Browns got a great value when they made that trade. So now bringing in Jim Schwartz, I wonder if you can make those 3 safeties work in tandem with one another. Maybe not, but also because Ronnie Harrison hasn't really done anything in his career, you could probably get him for pretty cheap. So I think that's a worthwhile addition, bringing him back to Cleveland, because I think him and Anthony Walker, again, I don't think they'll cost too much. And now let's start talking about places they can bargain shop, because again, I don't think they're going to have a whole lot of money to spend. I do think there's areas where they can certainly get better. A run stopper, if possible. We'll talk about this spot again once we get to the NFL draft, but David Onyemata, coming off a down year for the Saints, and a lot of time, I talked about him in the Saints video, a lot of times he follows up bad years with pretty good seasons, but he's also just the run stopping, middle of the field kind of plug that the Browns have been missing for so long. They have had the worst interior defensive line unit over the last couple of years to me. And also a lot of the fits I see people projecting in free agency or the draft for the Browns. Like, I've seen Javon Hargrave to Cleveland. It's like, yeah, Javon Hargrave's a good football player, but I like him more in Vegas, where it's like, dude, that type of pass rush up the middle, the Raiders need help in run defense too, but they're also starved for pass rush. For the Browns, it's like, if you bring in Hargrave, that cannot be the only move you you make across your defensive line, because he's not a high-level run defender. That's not his strength. He's a pass rusher. So would he help the Browns? Sure. But is he the guy to fix their run defense? No. So David Onyemata, I think, actually could be that guy. So we'll see. I mean, if they do sign a Javon Hargrave, I'm not going to be mad. But then I think, in the second round, you're going to have to draft Keanu Benton, which we'll come back to that once we get to the draft. So Onyemata could be a cheap, nose tackle they could go after. Edge, Clelin Ferrell, high-level run defender in his mid-20s, still a solid athlete. Hasn't really taken a step forward as a pass rusher, but working every day with Myles Garrett feels like a pretty good way to get better at pass rush. So also, I assume he'll be cheaper than Jadeveon Clowney. They're not going to bring him back, especially after having him dismissed from practice and not play week 18. They're that relationship has run its course. So they're looking for another starter at edge. Maybe it's Alex Wright, who they drafted last year. But if they do want to shop at that position, Clelin Ferrell, Samson and Bucom played pretty good for the 49ers. I'd be interested by that. Also, Charles Omenihu, another free agent from San Francisco. Could that be a fit? And then also Melvin Ingram. If they swing and miss on some of the young guys, because Ferrell, because he's still in his mid-20s, maybe he does command a good market. Maybe the 49ers do pay up for Bucom. Melvin Ingram's going to linger in the free agent market because he's old. So last resort, he could be this year's Jadeveon Clowney for the Browns. And, Melvin Ingram, year over year, I'm starting to think that, this will be the year he kind of falls off, but he always showcases he's got just enough juice. He's got just enough left in the tank. So who's to say he doesn't have one more year in under his belt? And, as a 4-3 fit opposite of Myles Garrett, I think that's a really nice pairing. So Melvin Ingram to the Browns, I think, makes a lot of sense. And then lastly, wide receiver. I kind of want to start with the last team I have here, because I don't think Allen Lazard's going to be cheap. If they make this move, this would be their headline move of free agency. They would restructure Deshaun Watson, they'd clear all that salary, and then Allen Lazard would be just about all they do. Maybe those re-signings on top of it. But Lazard's not necessarily the cheap name, but I do think him as a slot guy would be really kind of interesting, especially in a defense or an offense that prioritizes the run, has good running backs, or at least one right now under contract for next year, Nick Chubb. And the offensive line over the last half decade has been one of the best in football. So adding Allen Lazard to the mix feels like a move that would make Kevin Stefanski happy and would help out that run game. So interesting, but I don't think he'll be cheap. But I did want to talk about that off the top. And then the cheap names I did throw out, Sterling Shepard, a guy who never really hit his potential with the Giants, so I could see him being cheap. Now, granted, he's a fast, deep route runner in his mid-20s, so maybe his contract is a little lofty and something the Browns can't match, but having him work the slot or having him play outside and Amari Cooper full-time in the slot, I'm here for either one of those scenarios. And adding another over-the-top guy, Donovan Peoples-Jones kind of does that. I always call him the poor man's Gabe Davis. 6'3", works the vertical stuff, the goes, the post, the comebacks off it, all that sort of fun stuff. I think Shepard can kind of do that same long field work, but in a different way and with different strengths. A much better deep route runner, not having to win in contested catch spots, more speed than I think he puts to his use. So I think he could be an interesting addition. And then Jamison Crowder, a guy who has been a good slot receiver for a while. He just can't stay healthy. But when he is healthy, he's a very underrated player. So this would be a gamble here, banking on getting 17 games out of Jamison Crowder. But if you did, man, him as the slot guy would be really interesting because yards after the catch ability, can be an intermediate route runner, has long speed, he can work deep down the field, he can kind of do a little bit of everything, which would feel like it opens up that offense that much more. And based off who you're playing, gives you a guy that no matter who you're playing, what the weakness of their defense is, Crowder can help out, attack, and exploit that weakness. So I'd be interested by that signing, but I don't know if he'll be able to play 17 games, especially as he only gets older. So let's talk about the draft. Those two top 100 picks to me have got to be wide receiver and IDL. So again, if you're signing Javon Hargrave, then I think at 42, it's got to be Keanu Benton, the nose tackle from Wisconsin, because Benton can be your run stopper, and then Hargrave next to him as the pass rusher, especially in a 4-3 base, assuming that's not going to change under Jim Schwartz. That would be a perfect pairing up the middle. So if that does play out, then awesome. The Browns all of a sudden have a really good interior defensive line. But it could also go the other way around. Maybe at 42, you're taking Josh Downs. Maybe you're taking Jalen Hyatt. Maybe a Tank Dell if he lasts that long. And then you're going IDL at 98. Maybe someone like, I don't think Siaki Ika is going to be available there. Moro Jomo from Texas. Kendrick Coburn could be another guy who's available there. Gervon Dexter if you want to take a risk. Guy who's flashed but hasn't really ever put it together and hasn't had consistent runs of high-level plays, just kind of a play here and a play there. Nonetheless, maybe it could be an interesting value there at 98. But I think in whatever order, 42, 98 has to be wide receiver, IDL, or IDL wide receiver. To me, those are the biggest things. Got to get help for Deshaun Watson, and you've got to fix that glaring hole that has been there for like half a decade now for the Browns in the middle of their defensive line. And then, the rest of the way into your offensive line, I'd love to see them continue to add depth just because as those guys in the interior get older and also more expensive with some time, it'd be nice to have a contingency plan in place. Plus, Ethan Postage is a free agent this year, so maybe you can find a center somewhere in there. But I think you're going to have to use your top 100 picks on the receiver and the wide receiver and interior defensive line position I've already talked about. Maybe you find a center after that, maybe you don't. So again, I think this is more as depth more than finding a starter. And then, you have a couple free agent running backs, right? Dearness Johnson and Kareem Hunt, to the best of my knowledge, are both free agents. Maybe they do bring him back. Maybe Dearness Johnson, I could see that. He ran hard when we got to see him. But also, if those guys do hit the road, like, this is a loaded running back class. And even if it is waiting till day 3, like, Zach Evans could be there. This former 5-star recruit with a ton of talent. It just never really fully, kind of came together. And he was bouncing around from school to school. Like, maybe they could be the team that figures out Zach Evans. Or Tajay Spears from Tulane, one of the big Senior Bowl winners. Or Eric Gray from Oklahoma. That guy runs harder, as hard as anybody in this class. Like, he could be a really interesting fit for this Browns team. So I think because of how good this running back class is, there's going to be a lot of guys who linger on to day 3. So that is the Browns' opportunity to strike and add a dude. And I know they also added a running back last year, so maybe they're really not looking at it. But I think a better running back class this year, I would take advantage of that and get a guy in day 3 who could legitimately be that R&B too. And you'd have a role for him pretty much right away because the Browns are really good about utilizing their entire committee. So that brings us to our final notes. I mean, also, actually, one last thing. Linebacker safety. I think you can continue to take swings at linebacker. I'm a big Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah fan, but maybe you can find a middle linebacker with some good value later in the draft, and maybe he's a development guy that eventually becomes a starter. And then safety, same kind of thing, especially if you do let Ronnie Harrison walk, and maybe you move on from John Johnson III. This is the last year of his contract too, so maybe you're looking for a long-term replacement there. So I do think safety linebacker also makes sense there for day 3 picks and kind of swings to the bat. So final notes. I mean, this really comes down to Jim Schwartz to me fixing that defense, and then Deshaun Watson playing a lot better than he did last year. I think if they make these moves that I'm kind of projecting, wide receiver, add an interior defensive lineman, and then some depth across the offensive line, maybe a running back, maybe a linebacker, maybe a safety, but primarily wide receiver, IDL. If you knock those 2 out, then again, it comes back to Deshaun Watson has got to be the man worth that money, and Jim Schwartz has got to fix that defense. If those 2 dominoes fall and you patch up those 2 glaring holes in the roster to me, I think this team could legitimately take the division. Like, it's tough to say that about a team that's picking would be picking 12. Was obviously disappointing last year, but if Deshaun Watson plays at his best, he is a top 5, top 8 quarterback in the NFL. He's an elite guy. He's a franchise quarterback. And Jim Schwartz has had years where he's not only had solid defense, he's had really good defenses. So we could talk about Cleveland taking massive steps forward, both defensive, like you look at the defensive metrics last year, they were taking huge leaps forward there, but also their QB metrics, their EPA per play, all this sort of stuff that's very QB dependent could go through the roof if Deshaun Watson is back to elite play. So very scary team. Could give the Bengals a run for their money if all breaks right. But yeah, really fun team to kind of sit and watch what they do, because they're also very, their front office that I think has done a lot of things right, very analytically driven, and they always make moves that I'm like, okay, if that's how the Browns are thinking, kind of like the Ravens do, like if that's how they're thinking, I should try to figure out why and see if that incorporates with my process, and should it be something that I am also trying to bring into my scouting mind and things like that. So they're always an interesting organization that I try to keep my eyes on. But anyways, that is going to do it for my Fix the Franchise video about the Cleveland Browns. Again, let me know what you would do to fix the Browns this offseason, what moves you making in free agency, who do you think they should be targeting the draft, whether you're a Browns fan or not. I'd love to hear your thoughts on how you would turn this team around, have them hit their full potential, maybe even win the AFC North this year. Let me hear your thoughts down below in the comment section. Like if you enjoyed today's video, subscribe if you are new. But that's going to do it for me, and until next time, my name is Tej, and I'm signing off.